Okay, so it's October 2024. If anybody has been paying attention to the world of big tech and the news in the past few weeks, you will have noticed that they really have gotten on a big kick about nuclear energy. Right? This is really fascinating for many reasons. My reasons might be a little bit different than listeners' reasons here, but we're going to kind of go over some of the things here, and I'm going to start off on probably a topic that's a little bit more exciting, especially if you're into kind of almost like bleeding edge, almost sci-fi sort of concepts here, and of course. This is related to nuclear energy, and it is about nuclear fusion. So, they're talking about all these deals with utilities to basically buy electricity from existing nuclear power plants, and we can speculate on all the reasons why they might be doing that and all the reasons why, we're so excited about it and, that stuff. But we've got a guy who last Friday, October 18th, came on the record. This is a billionaire, right? Somebody with a lot of money who has clearly made enough more good decisions than bad decisions in his life, right? Because that's how you make money. Basically, you hope that the incoming exceeds the outgoing, right? Which is an interesting analogy because nuclear fusion is the opposite. You need the outgoing to exceed the incoming, right? Energy wise. And this dude is Vinod. He basically says fusion will be real within 5 years. Oh my God, are you kidding me? 5 years, man. What kind of mind of crystal ball does this guy got? What? All right. Of course, I'm not buying this. This is clickbait. This is attention seeking. This is crazy. Somebody who is completely out of touch with reality. Right? That is a fact. Let's think about why. Let's talk about fusion and understand it, and why these kind of things are just not just absolutely bonkers. Okay, so let's start off here. So I'm assuming, now of course I'm saying all that stuff, I'm saying about how it's bonkers, but I'm assuming that what he meant is that nuclear fusion power plants will exist in 5 years. Right? Because you could he could be playing a big old game and just saying, and just say that what he means is that nuclear fusion in and of itself will be real in 5 years, which is a bullshit statement because it's already real. We've already done it plenty and plenty and plenty of times. We've done it in nuclear weapons. We did it in tokamaks. We've done it in laser inertial confinement fusion. We've done it in fusers. We've done it in, probably half a dozen other types of devices that are all described in these PowerPoints. Like look at all these different types of machines that we can build, and you can get fusion to happen. Okay, all the way up to a star, which of course we don't build those, but there's fusion in there. So there's nothing in physics that says fusion is impossible. Fusion's not possible. It's always 50 years away. It's not fusion itself that is the problem. It is fusion that creates energy that can be converted into electricity and sold economically at a lower price than alternatives. That is what we mean when we talk about having nuclear fusion power. And I think that the situation here is that you just get into such crazy kind of numbers when you look at like how much fuel, which is usually in the form of isotopes of hydrogen, is required to provide energy to, say, just meet all the electrical power, or for that matter, all of the energy demands of humanity, it's a pretty small number in terms of mass, kilograms. It's not that much. And when you compare it to, say, the fact that we burn 31 million tons of fossil fuels every single day, it becomes really exciting. Wow. Just that little tiny bit of deuterium and tritium. You got all the energy you could ever dream of. Man, fusion's amazing, right? And people get into these mindsets where, like, if we get fusion, we will have, like, infinity power, and things will be so free and cheap, and it will banish world hunger and bad health and poverty and every other malady you can imagine. Yeah, okay, all right. Let's just think about this for a second here. What we've got is how do you get fusion from a physics textbook to a working electrical power plant? So let's just start off thinking about the most obvious way, the way that I prefer to do it, because I have nuclear fusion power in my house right now, as we speak. Where's it coming from? Where's the reactor? It's sitting about 93 million miles away from here. You know? What's it called? It's called the sun, right? So the sun does nuclear fusion. It fuses hydrogen 1, or protium, basically a proton, with another proton, and eventually you end up at helium. And the process releases energy, and that energy in the form of gamma rays and kinetic energy of particles and all that good stuff, and it heats up the material that the sun is made out of until it reaches the surface, which is incandescent and 6,000 degrees Celsius, and that radiates the energy off as electromagnetic radiation, visible light, infrared, ultraviolet, maybe some X-rays and some energetic particles too. And then a portion of that kind of pierces through Earth's atmosphere, and it strikes these silicon wafers out here on the roof. And it gets the electrons in the crystal lattice of the silicon all jostled up, and they find themselves flowing through a wire and through an inverter and into the wiring of my house, and they end up at here. And here, the lights and the camera and action, right? Solar power. It's ultimately fusion. But I'm pretty certain that Mr. Kosla here is not referring to solar power, because my opinion on solar power is techies think it's boring these days. It's too mainstream. You know, this year we're going to install 600 gigawatts of solar power. You know, we're going to make probably somewhere around 1,000 terawatt hours of electricity just from the new solar power we put in. And if you do the math and what they think AI is going to need, that's enough. That's more than enough to power all the data centers, right? But solar power is not cool. Why? Well, it just doesn't fit it doesn't jive with the sci-fi kind of, fantasy of technology that isn't real. Right? In Star Trek they had communicator devices and such, and it's like, wow, imagine if we had that. Well, guess what? We have that stuff now. Look at this. I can carry this thing around, sit on the toilet, and access the knowledge of humanity through the internet, and talk to people on the other side of the world with a camera and a microphone. Not that you'd really want to be doing that while you're on the toilet, but of course lots of people probably do it. Pigs, disgusting animals. But anyways, we want technology that's new and shiny. Nuclear fusion fits the bill really well. That disgusting old fission, that it creates all this radioactive waste, and it's, it's just not, it's not in vogue, and whatever. Although I think there's some people that are kind of getting into the mindset that nuclear fission is in fact cool again because, oh, nobody likes me, they're closing nuclear power plants, the share of nuclear power is dropping around the world, and well, when that happens, it's like when the family restaurant in town closes, says they're going to shut down, and on their last day of business, they have more customers than they've ever had in the entire time that they've been open. It's just the human brain is wired up to kind of love the underdog, right? Well, nuclear fusion isn't quite an underdog, but it is definitely something that is shiny, new, and exciting. And what we have going on is, all right, we know that the sun does its fusion, right? Let's just think about kind of the situation with the structure of the sun, right? So this is from St. Andrews in the UK. It's a nice old web page, probably from the 1990s, which is the kind of web page I prefer, right? Old and boring, like the solar power of web pages, simple, easy, no frills. So what they tell me here is that the core is the innermost 10% of the sun's volume, or the sun's mass. It's where the energy from nuclear fusion is generated, and basically the gravity of the sun compresses the material to the point where the density at the core of the sun is 160 grams per cubic centimeter. Wow. Just to put that in perspective, right? Water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter. The gravity of the sun compresses the hydrogen and helium so much that it becomes 160 times more dense than water. That is unfathomable to imagine those light elements being smushed into a density, into a volume like that. That's craziness. Human beings cannot achieve that kind of compression. We can't do it. Right? I don't know if it happens in nuclear weapons or not. Maybe I don't know enough about them, but there's no machine that's going to do that in a power plant. So, temperature of the core of the sun is around 15 million degrees Celsius. So you've got a combination of 160 times the density of water, so the atoms are really close together just by nature of pressure, because they're, pushed into that small volume. Then you've got the temperature, which is 15 million Celsius. So they're moving really fast and they're close together. Well, that gives us a lot of opportunities for some of them to hit each other in such a way that they overcome the electrostatic repulsion. So remember that a nucleus is positively charged. It's got protons in it. And it's like pushing two magnets together, right? If I have really strong magnets and I try to push them together with my hands, I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't have enough strength to be able to push them together. But say I put those magnets in a hydraulic press, then I can push them together and get them to touch despite the magnetic field. And that's what's happening here. A certain percentage of them hit, and then they get past, basically they call the Coulomb barrier, and then the nuclei come whoop, and they fuse, and they become, the protons come together, and of course there's a bunch of quantum mechanics stuff going on too, where you create neutrons and things I'm not going to begin to explain here, and it throws out gamma rays like crazy, and that's the energy being released, right? What's really, really interesting, one of the most interesting statistics of, pieces of data about the sun is its power density. You'd think that the power density of the sun is going to be really, really high because the sun is just so luminous, it's so bright. and it's creating 382 yotta watts of power, of electromagnetic radiation. What in the hell is a yotta watt, right? You know what kind of numbers you're going to throw at me here? All right, well, yotta is 10 to the power of 24. And I know that's real helpful, right? 10 to the power of 24. There's even, I think there's even a Ronto and a Quecto now that are even bigger. They're like the next step. So yotta is what they always use for the sun. Is always remembered it's 300 some yotta watts. Okay. That quantity of power, if you divide it by, and actually you can't even divide it by the whole volume. I think that maybe here, one of these pages is saying, okay, it wasn't this web page here, but basically in the core itself, the power density, so that's how much power is being produced, divided by the volume of that spherical, volume of space, is 300 and it's almost 300 watts per cubic meter. And you think, okay, it's the pressure is making it 160 times the density of water, and it's 15 million degrees Celsius. Man, that power density's got to be ridiculous, right? It's got to be crazy high. 300 watts per cubic meter is like the power density of a compost pile. You throw your yard waste and your food scraps in a compost pile, and bacteria and fungi kind of chew along at it, and it sort of smolders away. And with biology, it makes a little bit of heat. Sometimes it warms up enough that you can sense the heat. 300 watts per cubic meter, that compost pile can outrun that power density. A human body is much greater than 300 watts per cubic meter, right? Your body heat. So if the core of the sun was basically filled up to the max with just say, if that volume of space was packed full of people, a big concert, a big mosh pit, it would be hotter than what it is with nuclear fusion. It's pretty amazing, right? So you're saying all this. You're saying like how low the power density is. Well, then how in the world can the sun be the way it is and so big and so bright? Well, that's the magic of surface area to volume ratio, and the magic of just gargantuan size. So if we look at this page here, the sun is 1.3 million times the volume of Earth. You could fit 1.3 million Earths inside the sun's volume. The mass is 332,000 times that of Earth. So even though it's 300 watts per cubic meter, there's a lot of cubic meters. Multiply 300 by that number of cubic meters, and there's 382 yotta watts. And the magic of it is, you take that 382 yotta watts, and you divide that by the surface area of the outer, the outer surface area, and it becomes watts per square meter, which is going to be a really big number. And that's how the sun is able to be 6,000 degrees Celsius. Because then you have the fact that it sits in a vacuum, and vacuum only allows energy to escape as radiation. So to get that energy off the sun, it's got to be a temperature that's basically, following the Stefan Boltzmann law, which involves the radiation, power of radiation, the radiative flux, watt per square meter, as a function of temperature. Temperature to the power of 4, actually. So it's really hot. It's like an incandescent light bulb. The energy is radiated off as electromagnetic, radiation, light, visible light, infrared, ultraviolet, and whatever else. Okay, so that's the sun. That's how it's all the numbers associated with it. So now the idea is we got to reproduce that here on Earth. So that becomes a big, 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 big problem, right? Because we cannot tolerate a fusion power plant that only operates at 300 watts per cubic meter. We cannot have that. We need to be in like the megawatts per cubic meter. Like a coal-fired power plant, you know, they're running high kilowatts, hundreds of kilowatts, maybe even megawatts per cubic meter. A big boiler where you have to say it's a 1,000 megawatt power plant. You need to be creating like somewhere around 3,000 megawatts of heat, right? So imagine how many cubic meters a boiler has to be. If you're running at 1 megawatt per cubic meter, it's got to be 3,000 cubic meters, which is a lot of space. So you really need to bump up the power density. But what's the problem? Problem is that we don't have the pressure to create 160 times the density of water. Right? So what we have to do is, first of all, we can't use hydrogen. We can't use protons and protons. It's just not a good. It's like trying to burn a wet newspaper. I mean, yeah, there's BTUs there, but we just don't have the conditions needed to get it to come out. We need to get something with a little bit more kick. We need to find a fuel that's got a little bit more of a easier ignition profile, right? So basically for fusion, there's all these different fuels, and all these nerds go out there and like, man, proton B11 fusion is really cool, adeutronic fusion, DD fusion, and all these different cool fusions. And there's only one type that is practical in any sense of the word practical, and that is deuterium tritium, or DT. Right? And did they talk about this here? Yeah, here we go. This is deuterium is a proton with a neutron, hydrogen 2. Tritium is a proton with 2 neutrons, hydrogen 3. Deuteriums in any unit of water, there are about 1 out of every 6,000 molecules of the hydrogen or atoms maybe of the hydrogen are deuteriums. So you got D2O and DHO as part of your water, so we have to separate that from water, which we know how to do that. That's one of the easier parts of doing fusion. Trust me. Then we got to make some tritium, so we'd have to use some fission reactors and basically use lithium or other ways of creating tritium, and then we have to separate that out and kind of. It's expensive. It costs a lot of money, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's pennies on the dollar. And then we use that as our fuel. And then we take a, we have to have a machine in which to do all this. Everybody's like, yeah, just take the deuterium and the tritium, put them together, it fuses and throws out, you think about it like like burning propane or gasoline or something like that. It's a little bit more complex than that. And they show this freaking picture here. I wish they wouldn't do this, but they show this simplified idea. It's like, it's like a firebox in a coal-fired power plant. You put the stuff in there and it reacts, and it, and even maybe like a fission reactor. And then it heats up water and it drives a turbine and it generates electricity. There's a little bit more to it than that, unfortunately. All right. Actually, over here they kind of show a little bit better of a concept where you're getting radiation out and you're collecting the radiation and you're using that to produce heat, to make steam, to make electricity. So what's really fascinating about this fusion, I'm just like, it's fusion, it's got to be something really high tech and wild. No, all we're doing is making heat to boil water to drive a steam turbine. Just like Thomas Edison did back in 1880 whenever he built Pearl Street Station. It's the same exact thing. Right. So the machine, the boiler, the reactor, whatever you want to call it. You know, and they talk about kind of the physics here, what they call Q. That's the ratio of fusion energy output over energy input. So that's like I say, when a billionaire becomes a billionaire because his amount of money coming in exceeds the amount of money going out. Fusion is the opposite. You want to have more going out than coming in order to be successful. So, of course, we've used nuclear bombs. Done fusion in that plenty of times. We've done it in lasers with the lasers, the National Ignition Facility. Basically, take the nuclear bomb concept and make it into the size of a pea, maybe even smaller, the milligram level. And that's what they did. Right? So that's an intermittent process. You have to constantly do it. And for a lot of reasons, that doesn't become practical for power generation. That's why I was very skeptical about the big breakthrough, right? The big breakthrough of 2022 at the National Ignition Facility. I have a whole video on that you can watch at your leisure. Right? They call it break even. This is where it becomes really complicated because they talk about this whole break even, which is your Q, okay? Where you have energy out over energy in. If that number is 1 or greater, it's so-called break even. That's cool. That physics says that you broke even. But economics and thermodynamics of a power plant are nowhere close to that. And I think that they have a lot of stuff we talk about, maybe in this document, where when things like ITER and the National Ignition Facility and all these kind of fusion projects were being proposed, a lot of that stuff required government funding. It's all big science. I mean, industry doesn't, especially back in the day, wasn't going to invest in this stuff. So lawmakers were basically being told, yeah, they're going to hit break even, and they're going to be this close to a Q of 1 and all these things. And I think there was an interpretation that meant they were that close to generating electricity. No, we were that close to the theoretical physics breaking even. So you have to look at where your goalposts are at. Are you looking at just the scientific curiosity? Yeah, we created more megajoules out than we used to run the heating of the plasma. So, okay, here we show some pictures of some of basically what they call the tokamak. So that's the device that is considered to be the most promising for nuclear fusion. And there's all kinds of devices out there. There's all sorts of different reactor designs, everything from they call magnetic confinement or magnetic target fusion to these stellarators that have these crazy shaped plasma pathways, that they have these, spheromax, which I don't know how it is. They got these pinch machines, magnetized targets. They've got these magnetic mirrors. Oh my goodness, it gets just ridiculous. But the tokamak is the one that is the best in terms of being the closest to success. So in this document here, and of course this is from Harvard. Of course it's a little old, it's 2017, but we're going to basically look at the whole idea is they think that if they can increase the magnetic field in the tokamak, that allows them to make that plasma density higher. And when I say plasma density, nowhere near anything like a star has. Like we're so far below those levels that it's not even of value to mention the concept of it being comparable. But basically the idea is you can make a higher plasma density, and that allows you to make more megawatts per cubic meter. Like I said, for commercial power generation, we cannot be smoldering away at 300 watts per cubic meter. We need to be able to be hitting megawatts per cubic meter. Like the ITER tokamak in France that they're trying to get constructed, which is nothing more than a science project. It's not a commercial power plant in no way, shape, or form. It's 840 cubic meters of volume in the vacuum chamber in the toroidal shaped vessel. So if you're running at 1 megawatt per cubic meter, you could make 840 megawatts of plasma power. So their power density, they must plan on it being a little bit less than 800 or less than a megawatt per cubic meter, because the planned plasma power is expected to be 500 megawatts. Not quite to the level of utility scale power generation. Plus, it is intermittent. They're only going to be running it for short pulses. Because, like I said, it's a science experiment. It's not a commercial power plant. Getting that density is the really, really important part of this. But let's just say we can do it. I'm not going to be the one to doubt it. I mean, lots of really smart people are involved with this stuff, and they do the math and they figure it out. We've done lots of experiments over the years, like the JET, Joint European Tokamak, all these different devices. You know, the JET, JT60SA, FNSF, which is obviously a concept. Demo, which is supposed to be a commercial, or maybe not commercial, but demonstration power plant that actually has the thermodynamic systems in place to turn the heat from the plasma into steam to generate electricity. They say 2050. I see most projections are out well beyond that at this point. ITER is supposed to have its first plasmas in 2035 or so at this point in time. Right? So a lot of people say, well, we need fusion because it doesn't create radioactive waste. Right? Does it? I would argue that that's a little bit liberal in your assessment in terms of benefits, because you're running this reaction. Almost all the energy is coming off in the form of really high energy neutrons. Those neutrons fly out and they go through all the metal parts that this machine is made out of. There's a lot of stainless steel in these machines. There's a lot of cobalt, a lot of iron and nickel, other metals, and things are going to get bombarded, and it's going to cause them to be activated and become radioactive. So you have a lot of short-lived, and when I say short-lived, like maybe less than 100-year half-life of nuclides that are being generated as a result of this plasma or neutron bombardment of the materials the machine is made from. So then we've got an issue of how do you do maintenance inside of a machine that's that radioactive, right? I mean, how do we do maintenance in a fission power plant? Do we send people inside of the reactor vessel whenever it is offline for maintenance? Yeah, we do. A lot of times we fill it with water, and they'll actually dive in the vessel because the water acts as a shield. So if the materials that are in there are activated in any way, the water shields the people from the radioactivity pretty well. Plus, fission reactors don't create nearly the level of neutron energy. You know, you're talking about thermal neutrons. They're not as powerful as the ones that are involved here. They're not as high of quantity. So it just doesn't become as big of an issue. So then we've got that concern. So we can't send people inside the tokamak to do maintenance. We got to do the maintenance robotically using remote handling equipment and or combination of engineering things so that it doesn't require as much internal work. But then you've got this plasma in there, and it's going to have instabilities. That's another big challenge they have. And these guys with the AI, they're like, well, AI can help control these reactors and fix the plasma instability issues. And maybe that's true. I don't know enough about the science of plasma stability to say, but if plasma gets unstable, it's going to strike the walls of the reactor, and it's going to sputter off material, and it's going to cause damage. And it contaminates the plasma, and then you have to do maintenance, and do various things to clean up the inside of the vessel. So it becomes much more in terms of engineering challenges than you do with a fission reactor where it's all solid state and there's really not a lot going on in terms of dynamics of the fuel itself. You're just heating it up and doing nuclear reactions within the solid state fuel pellets. So I've been talking a lot, but basically they kind of go over some of the math here of how to get power density. And the idea here is that you can increase the magnetic field, which is the letter B. There's a power of 3 on energy gain. There's a power of 4 on power density, which is basically your economics of the reactor, how big it needs to be to get a given number of megawatts. So you've got power of 4. So that means if you can scale up that magnetic field high enough, the power density goes up really fast. And maybe you can be economical at some point. It's the whole concept here. So that's the dream, right? The ultimate thing we got going on is like, how in the world, like you didn't say anything, I didn't say anything yet about how we get the energy out of the plasma and turn it into electricity. Let me check my storage here because I've been talking forever. We out of space? No, we're still good. This is a long video. Let's get into how we convert this. And to me, this is the exciting stuff, the thermodynamics of the facility. So how do we convert? How do we turn a bunch of raging, angry neutrons into steam? Right? So in the tokamak, and this is looking at the older jet, the old school stuff. Basically, the torus, which is this, vessel that, like I said, toroid. It's shaped like a donut. Your plasma kind of spins around in there, and the magnets, they're superconducting magnets that surround that. They're coiled, and it maintains that volume. And fuel is injected as needed, basically deuterium and tritium, and they hit each other with enough probability that they're going to basically create enough megawatts per cubic meter to give you what you need. The neutrons fly out in every direction, and then surrounding this torus, you have a breeder blanket. What the hell is a breeder blanket? Well, it's usually lithium. That's that you like to use here. The lithium gets struck by the neutrons, and number one, the neutron loses kinetic energy, so it heats up the lithium, and also it turns some of the lithium atoms into tritium. So you're basically tritium and got to be something else too. I don't know the nuclear chemistry that's going on there, but basically you're adding a neutron, and one of the products is tritium, and that becomes fuel. So we say, oh, it's fueled by seawater. No, it's fueled by lithium. Everybody's like, oh my God, lithium. They think of lithium batteries, and oh, where are we going to get all this lithium? It's funny because a lithium battery doesn't burn the lithium. It just uses it as a reactant that it doesn't get consumed in the life of the battery. But in this case, you actually are consuming the lithium. And of course, the quantities that we're talking about, even if every power generator in the world was running on fusion and they were using a lithium breeder blanket, the quantity would probably not be that significant, just because it's a nuclear fuel, so you don't need a lot to give you what you need for energy. But the lithium is in there, and it heats up the lithium with the neutron kinetic energy and maybe some nuclear reaction heat, and then it gets carried away by some kind of a transfer fluid. It could be water, or it could be molten salt, it could be sodium or lead or some metal or whatever they decide to use. I mean, water's kind of the best, except that, you know, maybe there's a concern about it reacting with the lithium if there's a spring a leak in the heat exchanger, whatever. Somehow they get that heat transferred away from the tokamak. They send it to a heat exchanger, basically a steam generator, like what you'd see at a pressurized water reactor fission power plant. And then they take that heat and they use it to boil water and they make steam, and that drives your turbine. And at that point, it's indistinguishable from a coal burner, right? So these tokamaks, all the way up to this demo. So somewhere here, I'm going to assume it's like, I don't know where they drew it, but somewhere here there's a lithium breeder blanket, and that captures, not only does it capture the neutrons to make tritium, which then becomes fuel, but it also captures the neutrons to basically convert their kinetic energy into thermal energy to generate the power, right? So here's where we get into the problem of the economics situation. So, like I said, the reactor over here, ITER, is being designed with a Q of 10. So the idea is, let's just say for 50 megawatts of heating power, what they refer to as heating power is effectively the electromagnetic radiation and particle beams and things that are injected into here in order to get the plasma excited, get it all wound up so that it can react. They use these big vacuum tube kind of devices called gyrotrons that create sort of really crazy amounts of electromagnetic radiation, just like a giant microwave oven. It's really all we're dealing with here. And it ionizes the gas and gets everything all wound up. They're saying 50 megawatts of that, say, microwave. Let's just call it microwave, just so we visualize what this represents. It's electromagnetic waves, energy. 50 megawatts of that to create a plasma to fuse and generate 500 megawatts of fusion power, which is represented by the neutrons, represented by any kind of gamma rays or other electromagnetic radiation that directly comes off the plasma. Okay, so it's 1 unit in, 10 units out. But with ITER, they say that to create the 50 megawatts of heating power, they need 300 megawatts of electricity. And they're buying it off the power grid in France right now in order to run the experiment. So that really kind of doesn't leave a lot of margin, right? 300 in, 500 out. That's a ratio of 5 over 3. It's not very good, is it? So now what do we have to do? Okay, you got your 500 megawatts of plasma power. It comes out, it hits the breeder blanket, it hits whatever walls, it gets taken off as heat in a heat transfer fluid. It goes to the steam generator, it makes steam, it goes to the turbine hall and spins the turbines. Right? What do we know about steam turbines? About how efficient are they at converting heat into mechanical work? We know, they know with typical pressures and you find in a coal burner or fission power plant, you're looking at around 35%, 35. If you're really, really hot, you might be able to get it to 40, but that's rare. I mean, it's been done, but it's not common. It's because making steam of that temperature and pressure is a little bit of a pain in the ass. But let's just say it's 35%, it's about a third. So now your 500 megawatts drops down to 165 megawatts, or something like that. Wow. So we got 165 megawatts of power coming out, but we need 300 megawatts of power to heat the plasma. This is a bit of a quandary, right? Ultimately, the best situation would be if you could turn off the heating power. Can they do that? Can they design it so that the plasma is effectively self-combusting, self-sustaining, right? Because if I'm trying to burn a wet newspaper, for example, in order to get that to combust, I need to blast it with flame. I need to hit it with a propane torch or something to get it to burn. But once it's dry, it'll burn on its own. It'd be nice if fusion could be the same way. Because then you'd have 500 megawatts of fusion power. Let's just say it's 500 megawatts of steam to give you 165 megawatts of electricity. Then you don't need that 300 megawatts of power to heat the plasma. But I don't think it's that simple. Right? So now we understand why this isn't reality. That's a pretty bad deal. And I'm forgetting another thing. You've got, number one, you got the turbine, and you've got all the auxiliaries. So you've got feed water pumps, you've got condensate pumps, you've got cooling water pumps, you got, depending upon your cooling system, you might have fans. You've got then, that's all the power generating side of it. Then this thing is wrapped in superconducting magnets, right? Those superconducting magnets are 4 Kelvin. Right? And I know they're trying to use higher temperature superconductors. 4 Kelvin is the temperature of liquid helium. Down here they talk about how they want to use higher temperature superconductors to minimize the amount of cryogenics that are needed for the magnets. Because think about it, you've got 100 million, and I don't think I mentioned the temperature of the plasma in this ITER, or these tokamaks. It's between 100 million and 1 billion degrees Celsius. So somewhere between 10 and 100 times the temperature of the core of the sun. Right? So basically you're trying to find higher temperature superconductors because it reduces the cryogenics problems. It also, I guess it has some effect on the magnetic field as well. They can make a higher magnetic field, and because of the stress of the magnetic field and all the material science associated with it. The engineering here is crazy. So you need power to maintain the temperature of those magnets. It's a big refrigerator, right? Now, of course, the refrigerator has a waste heat stream. Maybe you could dump the waste heat into the feed water heaters and help kind of recycle some of it, but that's not going to be. You're still against the second law of thermodynamics. Is not on your side there. We've got, that's really the problem. Is the physics, the thermodynamics, basically energy in versus energy out. Can you make a machine big enough with a high enough plasma or high enough power density to get a reasonable rate of reaction in order to give you a good Q, yield of energy versus what you put into it, and then getting it out of the reactor, getting it to a steam generator, getting it to a turbine, getting it to a generator, and out to the switch yard, out to the grid, right? It's all part of the design of a power plant. So I can sit here, I can think about a solar farm, right? What's so cool about fusion here in these designs? The really nice thing is turn it on, turn it off whenever you want. Doesn't matter whether it's nighttime, daytime, winter, summer, hot day, cold day. The great cool thing about it is, hey, it runs whenever you want. That's a lot of money, a lot of science, a lot of engineering when you're trying to run a business of selling energy. Right? That energy needs to be priced appropriately in order to recover all that investment. Hey, it's really neat that you can build a little star and have a little sun and have it whenever you want. But I just think about a solar farm. If I want to build a solar farm, I go to a solar panel supplier and I go to a racking supplier. I put up the racking and I throw the solar panels on it. I bolt them down. I hook them up to an inverter. I throw the switch and it's generating electricity. Sun comes up, it makes power. One individual person can build it. Most of us can build a solar power system that will generate as much electricity or as much energy as we use in our homes for the same or less amount of money that you'd pay for a new car. Actually, it's less. Generally, you could do it for $20,000 to $30,000 easily. It would generate all the energy over the course of a year that you would need. Of course, there's a catch with that. It's that the times that you need it don't always match up with the times that it's being supplied. That is the singular problem with solar power. But everything else, I will take it any day over any of this shit. I would prefer that than any of this stuff. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's simply just no hassle, right? And I'm not going to get blinded by the light of crazy complex things. Okay, now we look at battery storage, all right? I remember back in the day, even 2017, which is when this was actually published here, 2017, everybody's like, oh, batteries, we're never going to have batteries that are of any substantial size. You know, the state of California has installed 8,000 or 9,000 megawatts of battery storage capacity in the last 3 years. They've basically built 3 Diablo Canyons worth of battery storage power capacity. I don't know what the gigawatt hours are, but they are 8 or 9 gigawatts of capacity in terms of generating power. And if you look at a map or a graph of California's power grid in the evenings, those batteries are pumping out serious juice. And it's all generated from solar during the day. And they did that in 3 years. Even Vinod over here with his fantasy about fusion in 5 years. Can't beat that. So that's my philosophy on which technologies we're actually going to use versus which ones are just fun to talk about and learn about and fantasize about. So I think we'll stop it there. Nuclear fusion.